His hand didn't ask. It claimed. Not like a thief in the night, but like someone who'd waited too long to pretend anymore. The sheets were twisted. My breath. Ragged. And the way he looked at me, as if he had finally found something he couldn't control and didn't want to. He didn't whisper love. He whispered, "You'll remember this." And I have. Every night since. If that pulled you in, there's more where that came from. Tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of what staying can really feel like. Thanks for listening, and for feeling every word. There was a time I thought love would arrive with music, the kind that spills from open windows. On summer mornings, the kind you can hum even when you've forgotten the words. My mother used to hum like that while boiling tea, her hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain cup, steam curling beneath her chin like a soft veil. I haven't heard music in a long time. The morning of my wedding, there were no violins, just the click of my heels across the marble floor and the faint creak of my father's breath as he rehearsed his apology in his head, but never spoke it aloud. We didn't exchange words. We didn't need to. My name was already inked on the contract. His signature, next to mine, trembled at the bottom of the page like it wanted to run away. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because when a father says, "We owe him everything," you believe it. Because "we" doesn't mean him. It means me. My body, my name, my silence. The first time I saw Richard Hale, it wasn't at the altar. It was the day before, through the tall glass windows of his estate. He stood at the far end of the library, back to me, arms folded, staring at a wall of books like he was punishing them for not answering a question he didn't know how to ask. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. I remember thinking he looks like someone who's already lost the person he built the house for. And I was right. Because this house wasn't built for love. It was built for appearances, for contracts and contingencies. I was just the latest transaction. The dress they gave me was ivory, delicate but heavy, like wearing an heirloom that never belonged to me. It trailed behind like regret. The lace scratched at my collarbone. I didn't complain. I wore my mother's pin at the waist. Small, silver, shaped like a sparrow. She said sparrows always return home. I wasn't sure I would. The ceremony was held in the east drawing room, under a chandelier older than both of us. It hung low, like it too was tired of shining for people who didn't look up. The guests, if you could call them that, sat in cold silence, their hands folded, their eyes politely vacant. It smelled of polished wood, white lilies, and something else. Maybe regret. The kind that seeps into walls and never leaves. There was no music, no toast, no smile from across the room. Only a notary, reading legal lines in a tone more suited to a funeral than a vow. Richard stood across from me. His suit was flawless, his posture precise, his gaze unflinching. When it came time to exchange rings, he took mine without ceremony. His fingers brushed mine. And for the briefest moment, just a flicker, he paused. The ring slid on, colder than I expected. Not tight, not loose. Just final. There was no kiss, no soft words. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock behind us, steady as guilt. Afterwards, as the guests thinned like fog in morning light, I sat at the edge of the reception room, hands in my lap. The ring, heavy on my finger like it knew too much. Richard approached, not with haste, not with hesitation, just with precision. He didn't sit. He leaned down, just close enough so only I could hear him, and said, "I won't love you. I won't lie about that. But I won't hurt you either. Unless you make me." Then he straightened, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked away. And that, oddly, painfully, was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. I didn't cry that night, not out of strength, but because it felt like tears would only confirm I'd lost something. But I hadn't. Not yet. I'd just been placed, like a porcelain figure on a shelf in someone else's home. Admired, ignored, expected to stay still. In the quiet of that first evening as Mrs. Hale, I walked the halls of the estate alone. My fingers traced the wainscoting, the velvet, wallpaper, the edges of picture frames with faces I didn't know. The whole place smelled faintly of cedar and polished leather, Wealth's favorite perfume. Somewhere in this mansion, I was supposed to become a wife. But no one had told me who I was meant to be in the meantime. I found my bedroom, separate from his. Of course. A fire was already lit. The sheets were turned down. There was a book on the nightstand, unopened, waiting like everything else in this place. I sat by the window, unpinned the sparrow from my dress, and held it in my palm. "You'll come home," my mother had once said, voice soft and hopeful. And I whispered, to no one in particular, "I hope I remember where that is." The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comforting kind that comes with peace, but the hollow kind that lingers after too many things have gone unsaid. It echoed in the vast hallways of the Hale estate, wrapping around the marble columns and tall ceilings like a ghost that had nowhere else to go. There were no voices, no footsteps, just the occasional whisper of wind slipping through cracks in the window frames, as if even the air didn't want to stay too long. The staff moved quietly, almost invisibly. They nodded, but rarely made eye contact. I wasn't sure if it was training, discomfort, or something else. Something learned in a house where affection was never part of the architecture. That morning, I woke to find the fire in my room already lit and breakfast laid out on a silver tray near the windows. Black coffee, toast with no butter, and an orange peeled with surgical precision. Someone had done this for me. But not him. Richard hadn't spoken to me since the night of the wedding. And yet, he hadn't left either. I could hear him pacing in the room above mine, slow and measured, like a man counting his thoughts one by one. I sat by the window, the tray untouched. My fingers absent-mindedly played with the edge of the cloth napkin. My mother used to say that a quiet house meant a restless heart, and this house had the quiet of a cathedral, long abandoned. I tried to stay busy. I explored. Room by room, I wandered through the Hale estate like a guest at a museum, where the exhibits were curated not with care, but control. Every object had a place. Every color matched another. Everything was beautiful, and nothing felt lived in. In one of the smaller sitting rooms, I found an old record player, dusty but intact. I touched the surface of one of the vinyls, smudging years of disuse with my fingertip. No records played here, I thought. No laughter, no memory-making. A maid entered, startled to see me. "Would you like me to clean that, Mrs. Hale?" She asked, eyes low. "Mrs. Hale." I still flinched every time I heard it. "No," I said. "Just leave it. I like things that remember." She paused. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not a smile, not quite. But something warmer than silence. Later that afternoon, I found the old kitchen tucked behind the main one, probably once used by live-in staff in a previous era. It was smaller, simpler, real. The tiles were cracked, the walls bore the soft stains of time and use. It felt like a place people had actually lived in, not just passed through. On impulse, I made tea. Not the perfectly measured kind from the formal kitchen, but the messy, real kind my mother used to make. Loose leaves, steam, that gentle hiss that fills a room with memory. I stood by the stove, holding the cup in both hands, eyes closed, and for the first time in this house, I breathed. I didn't hear Richard walk in. His voice cut the air. Not loud, but enough to jar me from the moment. "You're in the wrong kitchen." I turned, startled, nearly dropping the cup. He stood in the doorway, tie loosened, jacket draped over his shoulder, as if he'd walked straight out of a boardroom and into someone else's life by mistake. "This one has better ghosts," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes flicked to the cup, then to my hands, then finally to my face. "Did you make that?" he asked. I nodded. "It's just tea." He stepped closer, slowly, like I might vanish. "May I?" I hesitated, then handed him the cup. His fingers brushed mine as he took it. Again, that same half-second pause, like contact surprised him. He sipped, not much, just enough to taste. Then he said, "My mother used to make tea like this." And just like that, the room shifted. The silence wasn't as heavy. We didn't speak much after that. He handed the cup back. I rinsed it without a word. And he left the way he came, quietly, with something unreadable behind his eyes. But it was something. That night, I found a book by the nightstand in my room, one I hadn't noticed before. Wuthering Heights. A note rested on top, scribbled in strong, masculine handwriting. "Since you like things that remember." No name, no flourish, just those 6 words. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. Not because I loved the book. I didn't. But because he'd noticed. Somewhere in his own silent way, Richard Hale had seen me. Not as a wife, not as an obligation, but as someone trying. Later, as I lay in bed, I opened to the first page. The words blurred. My eyes burned. The house was still quiet, still too large. Still not mine. But that night, the silence didn't feel so hostile. It felt tentative, like something waiting to be rewritten. My mother used to say the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. She said it while playing the piano, her hands light as breath, coaxing melody from an old upright at our lake house. That piano had a broken E key and a pedal that squeaked if you pressed too hard. But it never stopped her from playing, or me, from listening. It had been 3 years since I last visited that place. 3 years since her hands touched those keys. 3 years since she died in that same house, with music still in the air. After a week in Richard's estate, its rooms too pristine, its silence too sharp, I asked to return to the lake house, just for a day. To collect some of my things. I told him. He didn't ask what those things were. Didn't ask if I would come back. He just nodded once, without looking up from whatever business held his attention. But later that night, I found a driver waiting at the door. And when I opened the car door the next morning, Richard was already inside. "I didn't expect you to come," I said quietly. "I didn't expect you to go alone," he replied, staring out the window. That was all. The drive was 2 hours long and mostly wordless. We passed fields brushed in autumn gold, old fences leaning under the weight of time, and barns that looked like they remembered better days. I stared out the window, letting memory fill the spaces Richard didn't. I saw my mother on the porch, apron still flour-dusted, waving at the mailman. I saw myself running barefoot down the dock, sunburned, laughing, unafraid. I saw the lake, always the lake, calm as glass in the morning, wild and gray by dusk. When we arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just gotten older. Richard didn't follow me inside. He stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, gaze turned toward the water. I left him there and went into the house alone. Dust greeted me first, soft and familiar. Then the scent of pine and old paper. And then the piano. It sat in the corner of the main room, covered in a faded quilt. I pulled it off gently, revealing the worn mahogany, the chipped keys, the tarnished pedals. I pressed one. Middle C, still in tune. Almost. I smiled, and for a moment, I forgot the weight of the ring on my finger. I sat at the bench and opened the lid. My fingers found the shape of the song before I remembered its name. It was the last piece my mother played. A quiet lullaby. One she never taught me with words, only through repetition. Through the way her shoulder would rise slightly at the chorus, through the way she always slowed down at the end, as if trying to keep the moment from ending. My fingers stumbled. I winced. The E key stuck, just like always. Some things never change. Behind me, the floor creaked. I turned. Richard stood in the doorway, coat still on. "I didn't know you played," he said. "I don't. Not really." I looked back at the keys. I remember enough to miss it. He stepped into the room, slowly, like the house might reject him. His eyes scanned the room, not judging, just taking it in. He looked at the books stacked on the mantel, the faded armchair near the fire, the cracked picture frame of me at 6, gap-toothed and waving. "This place," he said softly, "feels lived in." "It was," I said, "before life stopped showing up." I shifted on the bench, made space beside me. He didn't sit. But after a pause, he walked over and placed his fingers on the high notes, tentative, like he was afraid of, touching something sacred. "Did your mother live here long?" "Most of her life." He nodded, pressed a key. G. It rang out, clear and lonely. "I think," he said, still looking at the piano. "Your mother saved my life once." I turned to him. "What?" I was 19, drunk, angry, stupid. I crashed a car into a guardrail on Route 73. It was snowing. I remember the windshield cracking. I remember thinking I wasn't going to make it. He paused. And then there was a woman in a navy coat, kneeling beside me, talking to me like I mattered. She stayed until the ambulance came. I didn't even know her name. A beat. I found it out years later, in a donation ledger. Helen Whitmore, volunteer medic. The room fell silent, but not empty. "She never told me," I said, breath shallow. "Maybe she didn't think you'd want to know the kind of man she helped." I looked down. The sparrow pin on my coat caught the light. She believed people could be broken and still be good. Richard's voice, quiet. Then she was kinder than most. He sat beside me, finally. Not close, but not distant. His fingers found the keys again. Random, uneven. He didn't play. He just pressed, here and there, as if trying to remember what it felt like to make something gentle. I didn't stop him. We sat there a while, two strangers who shared a history they hadn't written, in a house that once belonged to someone, who taught us both how to stay when it would have been easier to leave. Outside, the lake shimmered. Inside, the silence didn't feel so final anymore. It was on the third shelf, behind a stack of forgotten gardening books and a dusty teacup with a chip along its rim, a plain, leather-bound notebook. No name, no label. Just the scent of lavender and old paper, and the soft crackle of pages that hadn't been turned in years. I wasn't looking for it. I'd come to the lake house again, this time on my own. Richard had meetings, or so he said. Part of me suspected he wanted to give me space. Part of me wondered if he just didn't want to come back to the place where something inside him had shifted. But the house had called to me. Not loudly, not with urgency. Just quietly, like a soft knock that waits for you to hear it. I carried the journal to the kitchen, placed it on the table, and sat in the same chair my mother used to read letters from. Her coffee cup still sat on the windowsill, faintly stained. Dust gathered around it like time had politely paused. The first page of the journal was blank. The second held a date. November 8th, 2003. And then, in her familiar, slanted handwriting, "Some people come into your life like accidents. You don't choose them. But they arrive anyway. Bleeding. Breathless. Needing someone to look at them, like they're still human. My breath caught. She was talking about him. Entry after entry, my mother wrote about her time volunteering at the roadside emergency unit, stories of strangers, small wounds, and quiet recoveries. But 3 entries stood out, dated in the same week, describing a boy, 19, found on Route 73, barely conscious, drifting in and out. No ID at first. Broken wrist, concussion, cold eyes. He didn't want to be saved, she wrote. He told me not to waste my time, but I held his hand anyway. I read the words again, slower this time. I saw something in him. Not innocence, not even remorse. Just someone who had forgotten that being alive was still worth something. I closed the book. The air in the kitchen felt different. Still, but heavy, like memory had, crawled in through the cracks in the walls and made itself at home. That evening, I returned to the Hale estate. The house greeted me the way it always did, quiet, proper, without affection. But I no longer hated the silence. I'd started hearing what lived beneath it. Richard was in the study, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes trained on a stack of papers that looked like they hadn't moved in hours. I didn't wait to be noticed. Read something, I said from the doorway. He looked up slowly, face unreadable. My mother kept a journal. She wrote about you. He blinked once, then again. I thought she might have. I think you meant something to her, more than you realized. He leaned back, rubbing his thumb against his temple like he was trying to erase the thought. I didn't deserve her kindness. That's not for you to decide. I crossed the room, sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "That night, I wasn't just drunk. I was trying to make something. Stop hurting. I thought crashing that car would make it disappear." He swallowed. She didn't ask what I'd done. She just told me I was still here. And that meant something. He looked up. I never forgot her voice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal, placed it gently in front of him. "You should read it," I said. He stared at it like it might burn him. But he didn't push it away. Instead, he ran his hand along the edge of the cover, not opening it, just acknowledging that it existed. "I'm sorry," he said. I frowned. For what? For marrying you like it was a transaction. For thinking I could treat you like a number on a page. "You didn't marry me for love," I said. "I didn't expect you to." He looked away. "But I didn't expect you to start caring either," I added softly. "And now that you do, maybe that matters more." The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. Then he stood and walked to the fireplace, picking something up from the mantel. A photo I hadn't seen before. It was of a woman, laughing, strong cheekbones, wind in her hair. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a young boy who looked so much like Richard it made me pause. "My mother," he said. I joined him. "She died the year after I crashed that car," he continued. I was already lost. That night on Route 73, I think I was hoping to join her. I looked at him. "You didn't." "No," he said, voice cracking. "Because of yours." We stood there side by side, two people who'd lost mothers and found each other in the echo. No kiss, no embrace, just presence. And in that moment, it was enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window, staring at the estate grounds bathed in pale light. Somewhere below, Richard was probably still awake, reading the words my mother had left behind. I placed my palm against the glass. The surface was cold, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Because somewhere between the past and the present, a door had opened. And neither of us had closed it. It began with thunder. Not the sharp kind that cracks the sky open, but the kind that rumbles low, like a warning you feel in your spine before you hear it. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the old light, switch, flicking it out of habit. Nothing. The storm had knocked out the power, and the Hale estate, so used to being under control, had surrendered, if only briefly, to nature's unpredictability. The silence was heavier in the dark. Not oppressive, just honest. I lit a single candle and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The marble tiles were colder than usual, but the quiet hum of rain against the windows gave the space a kind of comfort I hadn't known it could hold. Didn't expect him to come. The knock on my door was soft, not firm, not demanding, just 2 short taps that sounded more like a question than a presence. When I opened it, Richard stood there. No suit jacket, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp. There was something different in his posture, not stooped, not tense, just still. "I brought a blanket," he said. It took me a second to notice the folded quilt in his arms. Wool. Old. The kind you keep not because it's expensive, but because it remembers warmth better than anything else. "For the cold," he added, like I hadn't already understood. I stepped aside. He entered without looking at me. We didn't go to the fireplace. We sat on the floor, backs against the foot of my bed, the candlelight throwing soft shapes against the walls. He handed me the quilt, but didn't take any part of it for himself. I looked at him. "Why are you here?" I asked. He didn't answer, right away. His gaze stayed on the flickering light, as if waiting for it to blink first. Then, "Because you left the door open." I don't know what I expected him to say. Something grand, maybe. A confession. A fracture. But not that. Not something so simple. So human. I pulled the quilt over my lap and looked down at my hands. They didn't tremble. That surprised me. "I'm tired of being in rooms where people pretend they don't feel anything," I whispered. He didn't nod, didn't agree, but his silence was not the cold kind. It was the kind that listened. The storm picked up. Rain lashed at the windows. The candle flickered violently, then steadied again. And then, without a word, he reached out. His hand found mine, not firmly, not with urgency, just a touch. Barely more than a brush. I looked down at our fingers. He wasn't holding. He was asking. So I laced my fingers into his, and he stayed. We sat like that for a long time. The thunder rolled. The rain continued. Somewhere in the house, something creaked. And still, he didn't let go. No one kissed. No one undressed. There was no fire between us, only the slow warmth of shared stillness. And I think, somehow, that meant more. "You scare me," he said at last. The words came out small, too soft for a man like him. "Why?" I asked. "Because you're not trying to be anything." He paused. "You're just here, and somehow that's enough." I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the CEO. Didn't see the signature on the marriage license, the suits, the contracts, the polished answers. I saw the boy my mother had once saved. The man who still didn't know what to do with kindness that didn't come with a cost. "I'm not here to fix you," I said gently. He looked down. "Good. Because I'm still learning how to hold myself together." A beat. Then a whisper. From him, barely audible. "Don't leave." It wasn't a demand. It was the kind of request people make when they've already decided you won't say yes. So I answered with my hand, with my stillness, with my staying. The candle burned low. Our shoulders touched, not fully, just enough to know we weren't alone in that room. And as the storm began to fade, I realized I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Not because it had gone away, but because he hadn't. That night, I didn't sleep much. But I didn't feel tired. I sat awake, long after he left, listening to the rain slow to a whisper, feeling the phantom weight of his hand still woven through mine. And when I finally closed my eyes, I did so knowing that not all beginnings come with fireworks. Some come with a knock, and a blanket, and a hand that stays. I saw her before I heard her name. A tall woman, poised, with a navy trench coat, and the kind of self-possession that only comes from knowing you've already made peace with things that once tried to destroy you. She didn't smile when I opened the front door. She didn't introduce herself either. She looked me up and down, not rudely, just analytically. Then she said, "Is Richard home?" I blinked. "And you are?" I asked. Her eyes didn't waver. Someone who used to matter. I led her to the front sitting room, where light poured in through the tall windows, but the air still felt oddly still. I offered her tea. She declined. She sat upright, crossed her legs, and stared out toward the garden. "Tell him Amelia's here," she said. That name meant nothing to me. And somehow, everything. Before I could move, Richard appeared in the doorway. He didn't freeze. He didn't soften. He simply looked at her like a man glancing into a mirror he no longer needed. "Amelia," he said. One word, flat, controlled. "Richard," she answered, tilting her head slightly. "You've changed. People do." Not always. I stayed, unsure if I should, but Amelia's eyes found mine again. "I'm not here to interfere," she said plainly. "This isn't about you." "I didn't think it was," I replied quietly. That surprised her. I saw it in the flicker of her expression. Then she turned back to Richard. "I came because your father's dying." Silence. No thunderclap. No gasp. Just the sudden sense that something unspoken had cracked, even if no one had the courage to acknowledge it. "You should go," she said. "If only to see how little you still owe him." Richard's jaw tightened. "I buried him a long time ago." "No. You buried the version of you he hated. But the boy who needed him, that one still stuck, still waiting." Later, after she left, I found him in the back garden, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon, like it might tell him what to feel. "You knew she'd come," I said. He nodded. "She always shows up when things start to burn." "She doesn't seem cruel." "She's not. She's worse. She remembers me." We sat on the garden bench, the kind people buy for display and rarely use. But that evening, it held weight. "I haven't spoken to my father in 10 years, he said. "Not since I walked out of his house and told him I'd rather be nothing than become him." "Did he try to stop you?" "No." His voice was cold. He handed me a coat and closed the door behind me. I reached over and placed my hand on the wooden slats between us. Not touching him. "But close enough. You still carry him," I said. He didn't deny it. "That night on Route 73, he continued, I wasn't just running from myself. I was trying to erase him. The anger. The voice in my head telling me I'd never be good enough, even if I bled for it." I let the silence settle. "And now he's dying," he added. "And I don't know if seeing him will make things better or break what little peace I've managed to build." I turned to him. "I think," I said, "peace doesn't come from pretending the past never happened. It comes from knowing you survived it and still choosing to live." He looked at me. Really looked. And in that moment, I saw the boy behind the man, the one who still flinched at closed doors. You're not obligated to forgive him, I added. But you are allowed to forgive yourself. He exhaled slowly. That's harder than it sounds. I know, I said. But maybe going to see him isn't about him at all. Maybe it's about letting the part of you he broke learn how to stand again. We left the next morning. No bags, no flowers. Just a shared silence and the kind of resolve that doesn't announce itself, but settles into your bones like weather before a storm. The hospital was beige, predictably clean, unremarkable. His father was thinner than I expected, pale, eyes sunken like he'd been drained of memory. When Richard entered, the older man blinked slowly. No smile, no gasp, just recognition. Quiet and old. I didn't think you'd come, he said. Richard replied, Neither did I. I stood just outside the room, not intruding, not part of that story, but part of the man who walked in to face it. They didn't shout. There were no apologies, no breakdowns. Just two men, separated by decades of silence, now sharing a space where no more harm could be done. The damage had been spent. What remained was the quiet aftermath. When Richard walked out, he looked lighter, not healed, but less burdened. In the car ride back, he reached for my hand without speaking. His grip was firm, grounded, present. I didn't ask what had been said. He didn't offer it. But as our fingers intertwined, I knew something had changed. Not loudly, not instantly, but permanently, because it wasn't Amelia I needed to fear. It wasn't the past. It was the weight he never let anyone else carry. Now, finally shared. The ring had always been too heavy, not in weight, but in what it carried. It wasn't mine when I wore it the first time. It belonged to legacy, to debt, to a decision that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with rescue. I had let it sit on my finger like a mark of surrender. But now, back in the Hale estate after visiting his father, I felt its presence, again, and this time, it asked a question I hadn't been ready to answer. Richard had been quiet since we returned. Not withdrawn, just quieter in a way that wasn't avoidance. Like a man walking back into a room he used to fear and finding it empty of ghosts. I watched him from the doorway of the study as he sat on the couch, head bowed, fingers steepled under his chin. The light from the fireplace painted his face in a glow that made him look years younger. Or maybe just less armored. He didn't look up when he spoke. I always thought forgiveness was something someone else gave you, he said. But it turns out, it's something you have to allow yourself. I stepped into the room. Did he ask for it? I asked. No. His voice was quiet. But he didn't try to keep me from it either. I sat beside him. The silence between us didn't ache the way it once did. There was a softness to the evening, a slow exhale between two people who'd run out of ways to hide. I brought something, I said. He turned toward me. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the velvet box that had once held my wedding ring. I opened it. Inside, nestled like memory, was the band of dull silver he had slipped onto my hand weeks ago in front of people who hadn't cared. I took the ring out and placed it in his palm. His brows furrowed, eyes searching. I'm giving it back, I said, calm but steady. Not out of anger, not as rejection. He said nothing. I continued. When you gave it to me, it was out of necessity. Transaction, obligation. I met his gaze. But if you want to give it again, do it because you choose to. He held the ring for a long time, turning it in his fingers. His thumb brushed the inside, where I now saw a faint engraving. Still here. I had that added. The night before the wedding, he said. Didn't think you'd notice. I didn't, I whispered. Not until now. He looked up, eyes catching mine. I didn't think I deserved to give anyone that kind of promise, he admitted. but I wanted it there. Just in case. He closed his fist around the ring, then opened it again, then reached for my left hand. He didn't speak as he slid the ring back on my finger. But this time, the weight felt different. No longer a burden. No longer a cage, but something grounding. Solid. Real. He didn't kiss me. Didn't say I love you. But he said this. This time, I'm the one who owes you. Later that evening, we sat on the back terrace as twilight faded into the kind of dark that brings clarity. He poured 2 glasses of wine, his hands more relaxed than I'd ever seen them. The wind carried the smell of earth and firewood, and the sky above us stretched out like a soft promise. I used to think love had to be loud, I said. Obvious. Sweeping. And now? He asked. Now I think it just has to stay, I said, even when everything else wants to run. He looked at me with something between a smile and sorrow. Do you think we'll be okay? He asked. Don't think we ever were not okay, I replied. I think we were just waiting to mean it. He leaned back in his chair, one leg over the other, one hand holding the glass, the other resting just near mine. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. Some touches echo without skin. That night, I undressed alone. Slid under the covers alone. But when I turned out the light, he knocked once, then entered without speaking. He didn't ask for permission. Not because he felt entitled, but because we had finally stopped asking for space to exist in each other's presence. He lay beside me, fully clothed, eyes to the ceiling. The silence wasn't hesitant. It was complete. I turned to him. I'm scared sometimes, I said, that this might be temporary. He didn't answer immediately. Then, with a voice so certain it stilled the night, even if it is, you changed the part of me that used to want to leave. And that was the moment I knew. He hadn't just put the ring back. He'd chosen me, in full, with everything broken and everything still learning how to hold. 1 year later, I still wear the same ring. It hasn't been replaced with diamonds or reset in gold. It's still the original. Silver, simple, quiet. But now, when I look at it, I don't see what was owed. I see what was chosen. There's a difference. Back then, I thought love had to look a certain way. I thought it came dressed in flowers and declarations and grand gestures in public places. I didn't understand that sometimes love enters quietly, through a half-open door during a thunderstorm, or with a hand that stays when it has every reason to leave. Richard and I never had a second wedding. No reception, no guest list, no vows under fairy lights. But every morning, when he reaches for my hand before either of us speaks, I know this is the most honest vow we've ever made. Today, the lake house feels different. It's warmer, not just from the spring sun through the windows, but from the way the air carries sound now. Music from the old record player we finally repaired. Laughter from neighbors who stopped by unannounced. The sound of my own voice, no longer measured or hesitant. Richard is on the porch, sanding a piece of wood for a bench we're building together. He's not good at it. The angles are uneven, the stain too light in some places. But he's there, focused, gentle, present. That's all I've ever needed him to be. I'm recording this, by the way. Not for anyone famous, not for 1 million views, just for myself, and maybe for the woman I was when all of this began. If she were here, nervous, 22, standing in a dress that didn't quite feel like hers, I'd tell her this. You'll survive the silence. You'll learn how to stay in a room where no one says what they mean, and eventually, you'll help someone say, it. You'll cry once, but not because you've been broken, because you've finally been seen. And most of all, you'll learn that love isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose, again and again, even when it's hard. Especially then. We don't talk about the past often, not because we're avoiding it, but because it's no longer the loudest thing in the room. Sometimes, when the nights are long and the wind hums against the windows, Richard will tell me a story about his childhood. One where the furniture was polished but the voices were sharp. One where silence was not peace. It was punishment. He always ends those stories the same way. But I don't live there anymore, and neither do I. I still think about my mother. Sometimes I speak to her out loud while I'm cooking, or when I can't sleep. I imagine her leaning against the doorframe, tea in hand, smiling without saying anything. I wonder what she'd say now, if she could see all of this. Maybe she'd say she's proud. Maybe she'd just nod. Maybe she'd look at Richard, quiet, complicated, kind in the smallest ways, and say, "I told you he was worth staying for." This morning, I found a letter tucked into a book Richard left on my nightstand. No envelope, just folded once. His handwriting is still sharp, still careful, but it shakes a little at the ends now. Not from fear, from softness. Clara, you were never the part of my life I planned for. You were the part I didn't know I needed to deserve. Thank you for not leaving when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for coming back even when I stayed still. And thank you for staying quiet long enough to teach me how to speak again. R.I. didn't cry. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the book. Then I walked to the porch, leaned against the doorway, and watched him work. His sleeves rolled, hair a little grayer than it was last year, and a look on his face like he knew he was building something that might not be perfect, but would last. He looked up and saw me. Didn't speak, but he reached for my hand again. Same hand, same fingers, same ring. And under the morning light, I whispered, "Still here." Because love, real love, doesn't always sound like a vow. Sometimes it's a door left open. A night without light. A ring returned, and returned again. And sometimes, it's just the quiet breath of two people who finally understand. We don't always choose how we begin, but we can choose how we stay. If this story meant something to you, if it made you pause, feel, or simply remember what staying truly means, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more quiet, heartfelt journeys like this one. Your support helps these stories find the people who need them most. Thank you for being here.